Chapter 2 left us in a state of suspense. Ruth has been gleaning for the last 2 months during the barley and wheat harvests, and so she's being able to provide for herself and for Naomi, which is, on a physical level, the beginning of the restoration of Naomi and the answer to her statement that I left full but came back empty. And although Boaz had shown Ruth great favor, nothing else is said. What's happened to the relationship? Has it gone anywhere? Well, that leads to chapter 3, in which we have the great interaction of between Boaz and Ruth and the proposal for marriage. Chapter 3, there are 3 scenes. First, verses 1 through 5, Naomi's plan. Second, verses 6 through 15, Ruth's acting out that plan. And then verses 16 through 18, Ruth's going back and reporting to Naomi all that transpired. So first, verses 1 through 5, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he's finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." Now, the last scene in chapter 2 gave Naomi hope. And now Naomi, who has been passive since basically the beginning of the book, she takes the initiative. And that's why hope is so important. Hope helps us get outside of ourselves. It enables us to dream, to start thinking of others, not about poor me, and to think how we can start doing good for others. And so Naomi has seen all that Boaz has done for Ruth and for her. And so now Naomi comes up with a plan to help Ruth. This plan is what John Piper calls strategic righteousness. In other words, the thoughtful, purposeful plan to take the initiative to do what is good and right. And just as Boaz was God's instrument of blessing to Ruth and Naomi, so Naomi's plan is the outward and visible manifestation of God's plan and purpose. And again, Naomi probably did not consciously think this, but we need to remember, God typically operates through the actions of people. And success of this plan will be part of the full reward to be given you by the Lord that Boaz had prayed for Ruth in chapter 2, verse 12. Now, Naomi seems to be primarily concerned about Ruth's security and welfare. R.K. Harrison says that with the harvesting of the barley and the wheat completed, there would be no further work for Ruth until the olives and the grapes were harvested. Grapes were typically harvested in the summer and olives in the fall. And so the wheat harvest ended in May. So there would be a few months before the next harvest of the grapes and then the olives. So Naomi is looking for a more permanent solution to the whole situation. And she knew that Boaz is a relative who had shown great favor to Ruth. And consequently, Naomi is thinking he might respond favorably to a marriage proposal. And the plan that she came up with is very practical, although there was risk. She points out, tonight he's going to be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. In other words, he's going to be alone in circumstances where he might respond favorably to a marriage proposal. And Ruth, therefore, should wash yourself and anoint yourself and put on your cloak. In other words, make yourself as presentable as you can. And this might also signal the seriousness of your intentions. Also, she told Ruth, don't make yourself known to the man until he's finished eating and drinking. In other words, wait to approach him until he's probably in the most receptive mood. And finally, when he lies down, observe where he lies, then go uncover his feet and lie down, and he'll tell you what to do. Now, this final aspect of the plan has caused a fair amount of controversy. In some places in the Bible, the word feet is a euphemism for a man's sexual organ. Judges 3, verse 24, 1 Samuel 24, verse 3. To lie down with somebody can sometimes refer to sexual intercourse in Genesis 39, verse 7, 2 Samuel 13, verse 11. Consequently, some commentators have suggested that what Ruth is being asked to do is to expose Boaz's genitals and then have sex with him. Now, there is certainly a sexual overtone to a woman uncovering a man in the dark and lying next to him. But the idea that she is being asked to, or did, uncover his genitals and then have sex with him is not necessary to the text, and it is utterly improbable for a number of reasons. First, the godly character of both Ruth and Boaz has already been firmly established. And for Naomi to suggest an act of blatant immorality and for Ruth to agree to it would be completely outside of their characters and completely contrary to Boaz's character. Secondly, what is being proposed here apparently is a nonverbal custom of requesting marriage. And we can see that in Deuteronomy 22, verse 30, Deuteronomy 27, verse 20, Ezekiel 16, verse 8, and Malachi 2, verse 16. And that's corroborated in verse 4 here, where Naomi says, he'll tell you what to do. And thirdly, the fact that neither Ruth nor Boaz took Naomi's proposal in a sexual way is confirmed by the actual account of what happened, because no sex is described here. Ruth is clearly seeking marriage. She says, for you are a redeemer. And Boaz promises and agrees, I will do for you all that you asked. And he calls her a worthy woman. In fact, the plan, however, although it was, had sexual overtones to it, it was a legitimate plan, but apparently it is in accord with and within proper custom, but there's still risk, because Boaz is under no obligation to marry Ruth, and as we'll find out in verse 12, he's not even the nearest kinsman-redeemer. And secondly, as a rich and powerful Israelite landowner, he could have responded by mocking Ruth's actions as a presumptuous attempt at social climbing by a poor, widowed Moabitess. And third, there was the risk that he could have used the opportunity to fulfill his sexual pleasure and then charge her with entrapment or accuse her of being a prostitute. So there were certain risks to this plan, but nevertheless, Ruth said, all that you say, I will do. Well, then that leads to verse 6 through 15, which describe how the plan was played out. So, she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, Who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. And he said, May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first in all that you, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning. So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. Now, as I've mentioned on more than one occasion, our author shows himself to be a master stylist. And so, as we have the outline in the book, all of chapter 3 is arranged chiastically in the inverted order. This pivotal middle section itself is arranged chiastically. And I show that in the book as well. Now, we've mentioned on more than one occasion, God typically operates through the actions of his people and uses natural means and, quote, coincidences, unquote, to effectuate his plan. We see the same thing at work here. After Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. In other words, Boaz naturally got himself into a good mood, having no idea what was about to happen, and then just happened to lie down in a place in the threshing floor where the actions that were about to occur could take place without being seen or interrupted or misinterpreted by others. Okay? It's just one of those natural things that God was superintending. He didn't lie down in the middle of his other reapers. Nope, went off in the corner at the end by himself. Now, Ruth did as Naomi had instructed. And when Boaz was startled to find a woman lying at his feet, he said, Who are you? And Ruth says, I'm your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Now, Lawson Younger points out that the Hebrew word translated feet, margalat, is only used in the Bible here in Ruth 3, verses 4, 7, 8, and 14, and in Daniel 10, verse 6. It's derived from the word which means foot, lower leg, and leg. In Daniel 10, verse 6, it refers to the legs as a whole. And consequently, Younger concludes that Ruth is to uncover his feet or legs and lie down close beside him, probably not simply crossways at his feet as most people understand it. And Ruth replied, I'm Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. The word for wing in Hebrew is kanap. It is also the same word for a man's skirt or his robe, and therefore several translations have Ruth saying something like, spread your skirt over your handmaid, or spread your covering over your maid, or spread the corner of your garment over me. Well, to spread a garment over someone was an idiom meaning to marry the person. Walter Kaiser points out that idiom is reflected in the custom still practiced by some Arabs of a man throwing a garment over a woman he's decided to take as his wife. But the wording in the ESV, which I'm using, spread your wings, I think is important here, and it's rich in meaning, because that's the literal translation of what Ruth said. And the reason why it's important is it picks up what Boaz himself had said to Ruth in chapter 2, verse 12, when Boaz said, the Lord repay you for what you've done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Now, the only other place where the phrase spreading the wings is used in connection with lovers is Ezekiel 16, verse 8, where God describes Israel as a young maiden when, quote, I made my vow to you and entered into a covenant with you, declares the Lord God, and you became mine. And so that phrase is also used elsewhere in that verse. But So it's talking there basically about marriage. And so John Piper points out that Ruth was basically saying, I would like you to be the one to whom you pledge your faithfulness and with whom you make a marriage covenant. Ruth is using the same idiom or phraseology as Boaz used, and that suggests that Ruth understood when Boaz said in verse 2 or chapter 2 verse 12 that the Lord repay you for what you've done, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, that she is using that same phraseology because she's understanding Boaz, I think, to say, because you take refuge under the wings of God, you are the kind of woman I would like to cover with my wings. And as one writer says, by repeating the key phrase or the key word from his own lips, Ruth is essentially asking Boaz to answer his own prayer. In other words, Boaz had prayed, may the Lord God bless you and repay you for all the kindness you've shown, and, by the Lord, under whose wings you have come. And so now, since Boaz is God's instrument here, Boaz can answer his own prayer that God bless her by spreading his own wings, so to say, over Ruth. Pardon me. And so, in other words, by covering Ruth with his kanap, in other words, marrying her, Boaz will be implementing Yahweh's kanap, namely his protection of Ruth. Or, to put it another way, in Naomi's petition in chapter 1, verse 8, that God show chesed to Ruth for all the kindness Ruth has shown, the chesed of Boaz towards Ruth is the form in which Yahweh conveys his chesed to her. And again, this is something that is true for all of us, particularly those of us who are Christians and in relationship with God, that we are his instruments in effecting his will. And so we may not see it, we may not feel it, and yet when we act in supposedly natural ways, behind the scenes, God is the one orchestrating the story. Now, Boaz's response to Ruth was to not use the moment to gratify his sexual needs. And his statement in verses 10 and 11, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. It confirms that Ruth had rightly judged Boaz's intention when he had spoken with her back in chapter 2 in the field. And when Boaz in verse 10 refers to this last kindness, the word translated kindness again is chesed. Ruth's first chesed was committing herself to Naomi, leaving her country, coming to Bethlehem. Then she continually demonstrated chesed by diligently gleaning in the field throughout the barley and wheat harvests. Now she's committing herself, and now Boaz says, you've made this last chesed greater than the first. Now she's committing herself both to Boaz and to restoring clan wholeness by her symbolic action of proposing marriage to Boaz. By covering Ruth with his wings, Boaz in turn is continuing his chesed to Ruth. And so that is the full reward that he had prayed that the Lord would show to Ruth back in chapter 2, verse 12. Now, John Piper points out another important aspect of God's working through Boaz and Ruth, which again would have been unknown to both Boaz and Ruth. Ruth is about to be folded purely and righteously by Boaz into a line that will give birth to Jesus Christ. The purity of the moment and the purposes of eternity come together in this holy moment. Now, Jesus had said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Now, that, of course, refers to eternity, but it begins now. You see, Boaz and Ruth remained sexually pure on the threshing floor despite being in a sexually charged situation. That's a lesson for us. It's relevant to our sexual life. We need to have, if we have a greater and deeper view of life, and realize that we are God's instruments, it will affect what we do sexually. And if we wait until the proper time, namely marriage, then God will honor that in our lives. God's honoring us extends far beyond our sexual lives. This entire book is largely about people's character and doing good primarily to those of the household of faith, but to others as well. You see, we are to act as goels, kinsman-redeemers, for those in need. We are all to show chesed to others. I mean, Jesus said, "By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." And so the church, both individually and collectively, if we took that seriously, our influence in the world would be immeasurably greater. And just think about where we've come so far. Notice that we've seen how this plan was played out. But there are some Christians who think that planning and strategizing and so on is somehow just worldly, and you just need to pray and go as you're led, your feelings. That's not what this book of Ruth is doing. I mean, Naomi came up with a plan. There were some risks involved, but she knew the characters she was dealing with. She knew the state of the law regarding the kinsman-redeemer and so on. She was looking out for the welfare of Ruth, and Ruth played this out, and so far it has worked. But the fact that Boaz is an honorable man who committed himself to Ruth is shown in the fact that he acknowledges that there is a nearer kinsman, a kinsman nearer in relation to Elimelech than he is. And because of that, the legal duty to be the goel fell on that nearer kinsman. And Boaz did not want to act against the hierarchy of the clan structure. Now, from a storytelling point of view, we talked about how the author here is a master storyteller. This fact that Boaz says, "Yeah, I love you, I will redeem you, but there is a nearer kinsman, and I cannot go against that. If he will redeem you, then let him do so. But if not, in the name of God, I will." So this adds another element of great unresolved tension into the story. Things build, and then tension and suspense. And then, it looks like now they're going to get married and they love each other. But there's a wrinkle, a fly in the ointment, so to say. But Boaz makes it clear in verse 13 that if the nearer kinsman will not redeem, he swore an oath to the Lord and says, "As the Lord lives, I will redeem you." Now, as one writer points out, that solemn and binding oath, that is the most solemn and binding oath a Hebrew could make on himself. To not carry through with his commitment would be to take the Lord's name in vain. And another writer points out that Boaz is saying that he is going to redeem Ruth because God lives. And that's a lesson for us. We all say we believe in God. We know that he's a living God. But how does that really affect us? How should the fact that God is alive, if we took that deep into us, it should affect everything we think, we say, and we do. Now, in verse 14, again, Boaz is concerned. He makes sure that no one is to know that Ruth has been present, and that will ensure both their reputations, but particularly hers. They will remain unstained. And then he symbolizes his commitment by giving her 6 measures of barley. Now, many manuscripts say, as does the ESV, that then she went into town, but the Masoretic text, which is the official Hebrew text, says then he went into town. And if that is the correct reading, that indicates Boaz was not delaying in his commitment to resolve the matter of the nearer kinsman. And that certainly would be keeping in line with his character in this book. Now, the last scene, verses 16 through 18, says, when she came, or as the Masoretic text, 16, when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that he had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.' And she replied, 'Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today.'" Now, in this short scene, Ruth adds the important statement that about the 6 measures of barley, and he said, "You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law." By repeating the words empty, we're taken back to Naomi's statement in chapter 1, "I went away full, but the Lord brought me back empty." Again, Boaz is God's instrument to effect God's will in the life of Naomi as a result of the loss of her husband and her sons. Now, Naomi's response to Ruth shows that she understands Boaz's feelings and his commitment to resolve this matter. But let me conclude this chapter and this lecture by again showing that the author here is a literary master, because the chapter opened with Naomi's, in verse 1, with Naomi saying, "My daughter, should you not seek rest?" and calling her my daughter. It ends with Naomi and the same themes of rest and my daughter in verse 18. "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest until, but will settle the matter today." But now you see, in verse 1, we didn't know how things were going to play out. But now there's resolution in sight. And we will see the resolution of this unresolved tension. What about the kinsman-redeemer and so on in chapter 4.